a hot, sunny afternoon in the summer of 1995, my college roommate and I were getting hungry. We had been on the road for only a few days, but we were already getting pretty sick of McDonald's, Burger King, and every other type of rest stop fast food. So we came to an agreement. No matter where it happened to be, no matter how much or how little it looked like we would find, we were going to take the very next exit off this highway and just drive around until we found a local place to sit down and eat. Soon enough, an off-ramp pulled into view next to a green exit sign, Hazelhurst, Mississippi. We looked at one another as if to ask, are we going to do this? You see, we were on a road trip. Road trip. Even now, just saying that phrase gives me a little shot of adrenaline. It almost feels wrong to say it in a normal tone of voice, like it's only ever appropriate to shout it. Road trip! I think it evokes that visceral feeling because it's connected to something uniquely American about us. Other cultures may go on walkabout or get a Europass ticket and ride the rails, but we road trip. The modern sense of the word road, in fact, is apparently only about as old as the United States. We connected this vast country of ours with crisscrossing tracks we called railroads. And later, we built roads for our cars, which are so deeply embedded in American identity that during the Great Recession, we bailed out the U.S. auto industry. Why? Banks were at the root of the crisis, not cars. Our financial institutions and the dollar itself are a source of global influence and power, not trucks, sedans, or SUVs. Yet we literally could not bring ourselves to accept a world full of Hyundais, Volkswagens, and Toyotas without Explorers, Jeeps, and Mustangs. Note also that it's a trip, not a vacation, not a holiday. Dictionaries define a trip as a voyage, a journey, but also an exciting or unusual experience. Man, that was such a trip. Or an obsessively particular state of mind, like a guilt trip. Or even an intense visionary experience brought on by psychedelic drugs, like an LSD trip. These all signal that a trip is more than just a physical journey. It's also a spiritual, an emotional, or an intellectual journey. And in my opinion, that is especially true for the mother of all American road trips, the cross-country trip. The cross-country trip is an epic journey, no matter how you do it. And you can do it a number of different ways. To get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific or vice versa, we're talking roughly 3,000 miles, give or take. You can travel the northern route via the Great Lakes, the southern route through Texas and New Mexico, the middle route over the Rocky Mountains, and all kinds of variations in between. You can do it in a work week if you are really up for that particular kind of pain, or you can easily take a month or more. That's the kind of trip that my roommate and I embarked on that summer. The morning after we graduated from college, we packed literally everything he owned into his white Dodge sedan, along with a few things of mine, and left for a meandering journey across our nation. Neither of us were in a hurry. Our jobs didn't start until later in the summer, so we gave ourselves 3 weeks to get his car from Philadelphia back to his parents' house in L.A., and we designed our route to take maximum advantage of that time. He had far-flung relatives who all volunteered to let us crash along the way. We also had help from that incredible American institution known as AAA. Quick aside here, adults in the room, how many of you have a current AAA membership? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, take good note, everybody. There is a good reason for that, okay? All of you should get a AAA membership once you start driving. Yes, you get discounts on car insurance, but more importantly, anywhere in the country, no matter how remote, you run out of gas or you blow a flat tire, one phone call, 30 minutes later, a friendly stranger in a truck shows up and gets you back on the road free of charge. Another thing, though, that AAA will do for you free of charge is plan a road trip. I'm sure that there's an app for this now, but back in the 90s, if you wanted to drive long distances and find interesting things to do along the way without either A, getting lost, or B, spending an entire semester researching how, you asked AAA. Tell them where you want to go, how long you want to take to get there, and they plot a journey custom-made for your interests. Do you prefer highways or byways? Hotels, motels, or campgrounds? National parks or kitschy world's biggest tomato type of rest stops? AAA will get you there. We plotted our journey west across Pennsylvania to Ohio, down through West Virginia and the deep south to New Orleans, back up through the Midwest via Kansas City, over the Rockies into Utah and Nevada, and up and down the Pacific Coast Highway from San Francisco to San Diego. At that point in my life, my major travel consisted of one weekend in California for my uncle's wedding and an overnight school trip to Niagara Falls in Quebec. I did live for a summer on my own in New York City, but most of my travels consisted of back and forth from Philadelphia to my grandparents' house at the Jersey Shore. The writer Eudora Welty once wrote, "One place understood helps us understand all places better." I think I know what she meant. Over many years, I witnessed the ways that Philadelphia changed and the ways that it stayed the same. Through our repeated interactions, I learned the values of the people who lived there. I could see the city skyline from the end of my parents' street. And as I grew up, I met more and more people who saw that skyline every day too, but from closer up or from farther away, from the east or the west or the north. I grew to understand what we had in common and what we didn't, and what bound us together accordingly. Yet, there's also a different type of understanding that in many ways is the opposite of what Welty describes. I thought I understood, for example, how big my home state of Pennsylvania was, until the first day of our trip was coming to a close, and our initial excitement had worn completely off because we were still in Pennsylvania. I had read about the independent American spirit, learned countless history lessons about how we fought for and valued our freedom. But after spending time in large swaths of the country where no shopping centers were within a day's drive, I gained a new appreciation for what it meant to be self-reliant. I had hopped flights from one city's airport to another, but when a skyline pulled into view, after days moving through small towns where neighbors were few and far between, I felt I had a new perspective on just how many people crowd into so small a space, and how that must necessitate an easier acceptance for our differences. All of a sudden, I realized what a coastal urban demographic meant, and that it meant me. It wasn't my plan for this meditation, but I was really happy when I learned that I would speak to you today, the day after Election Day. To judge only by the state of our politics, we seem to be having more and more trouble understanding one another in this country. I will concede, though, that recent disclosures by Facebook and Twitter likely mean it's really all just the Russians. We are not nearly as divided as Putin would like us to believe. Still, I have a hypothesis to share with you. I think every American would understand America and other Americans better if we all took a cross-country trip. Can we properly wrestle with the ghosts of the South if we haven't seen for ourselves the gradual, incremental changes that accompany every mile further away from the Mason-Dixon line? Can we understand the zeal of Western conservationists if we haven't passed one brown hill after another covered with parched scrubs? Can we empathize with those who have little patience for the heightened sensitivities of city dwellers without measuring for ourselves the razor-thin margin for error of a rural farmer? I'm sure that, yes, we can. However, I'm also sure that I understood them even better once I saw with my own eyes what connected Louisiana to Oklahoma, to Colorado, to Wisconsin. You know, the trip wasn't all serious moments. My roommate and I had some epic wiffle ball battles in the forests of Colorado and the fields of Oklahoma. We shared similar tastes in music, fortunately, but we debated endlessly which bands had ever produced work that rose to the level of a quote-unquote perfect album, which we defined as an album where you never needed to skip a single song. For the record, we agreed on Prince, U2, Public Enemy, and Liz Phair. But like the dictionaries imply, my cross-country road trip also had spiritual, consciousness-altering elements to it. Until I camped out in rural Arkansas, I had never really seen the Milky Way, and thus realized my place in the universe. I drove through the Utah desert at sunset shortly after stumbling on Zion National Park, and I watched it cast colors I couldn't have imagined onto desert outcroppings that felt carved by giant aliens. I redefined boredom crossing the plains, where I also redefined excitement by surviving a Kansas storm front that was so big, dark, and scary, I seriously wondered if it might be my last. And indelibly burned in my brain until the day I die is that moment the Rocky Mountains magically popped into view on the horizon, dominating a prairie sky that up until then was the biggest thing I thought I'd ever see in my life. I hope every one of you, at some point in your life, and preferably while you're young, makes a point of taking a cross-country road trip. It will deepen your understanding of this amazing nation we call home. You'll find yourself awestruck by the beauty of this country and the people that it nourishes. Random encounters with strangers you'd never have occasion to meet otherwise will affirm your faith and reinforce your pride in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I can promise you, it will be an experience that you'll come back to over and over again throughout the rest of your life. We did take that highway exit for lunch. Hazelhurst was so small, we accidentally drove through it and had to turn around and come back. I had my first and still my only plate of grits, and I also ordered fried catfish. It came out with the head still on it and the eye kind of looking up at me reproachfully, but I ate it anyway. We had a nice conversation with the waitress while we ate and got back on the highway soon after. And later that year, I convinced a friend to teach me how to play guitar, and I was psyched when I picked it up pretty quickly. I loved blues music, so I started spending a lot of time learning how to play songs by Delta blues masters like the legendary Robert Johnson. Rumor had it, Robert sold his soul to the devil. They say he walked out to a country crossroads in the deep dark of a Mississippi midnight, handed his soul over to Lucifer along with his guitar for a tuning, in return for what all of his peers described as an unearthly musical talent. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. But what is true is that he was probably the most influential musician of the 20th century. It's also a curious fact that, as I learned many years after I first picked up a guitar, he was born and raised in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. Thank you.